Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we are well into our 29th year, I interview writers about their craft, what they're working on, what they've accomplished in the past, what they're planning for the future. It's a wider net than that, though, as if you have been watching the show for the last 29 years, you know that occasionally we have other brands of artists on, painters, sculptors, musicians, actors. So if you have an idea for a guest who might be good for the Writer's Block, whether a writer or other brand of artist, watch for our address at the end of the show. We'd be very happy to get your suggestions. I also want to remind you that the Writer's Block is a product of cable access television. All the programs originally produced here at 1623 Studios are a result of cable access television. They're for and about Cape Ann. So don't be tempted by Dish. You stick with cable and stick with the Writer's Block. Tonight, I'm happy to say we do have what for our program is a novelty. We have an artist, a visual artist on by the name of James Chisholm. He is originally from Winthrop, Massachusetts, attended Revere High School, then Northeastern, and although he's been for many decades an artist, he graduated with a BS degree in industrial relations. That didn't last. He went after that to the Museum of Fine Arts School and studied art and became an accomplished artist, very well known in Boston and the North Shore and nationally because he's had shows in such prominent venues as New York City. I'm going to read, as part of further introduction, a couple of brief paragraphs from his website, and you'll see the website address on the screen. James writes on the website, "I paint and draw every day, most of the time outdoors, whenever and wherever. Recently, I started doing wood sculpture again based on natural themes. I enjoy the experiences that nature provides during the various seasons of the year, and recently installed a show of paintings titled Painting Experiences in Nature at North Shore Community College. I live in Salem. I am married. I have 3 children, the youngest now 36. In my earlier years, I attended Northeastern University in Boston, majoring, as I mentioned, in industrial relations. A few years afterwards, I was accepted to and graduated from the School of the Museum of Fine Arts. I graduated later from Mass College of Art with a master's degree of science in art education. His paintings hang in collections at Harvard University's Grossman Library, North Shore Community College, and the Boston Museum of Fine Art." Welcome to the show, Jim Chisholm.
Glad to be here, John.
I should also add I had the honor of teaching with you at North Shore for many years.
That's true.
Tell me how you got interested in art and how you got uninterested in industrial relations.
Well, while at Northeastern, I had friends that started to tell me about this very interesting school across the way from the campus. And so after a period of time, I did go over to the MFA to see shows occasionally, and I had an interest in doing artwork for many years, but just as sort of a side thing. But I started to have an increased sense of that maybe art was where I wanted to be, painting in particular. So they mentioned the school, and I went over and investigated, and I was accepted to their school in 1965. And one person at Northeastern was quite helpful, who was a teacher of history of art named Bob Wells, who had graduated from the museum school, and he wrote a recommendation for me. So that was certainly one of the start-offs of what I did later. The school is an interesting school. It wasn't all that expensive at the time, but it was difficult to get accepted to. And I studied with many, really full-blown artists. They were really into the work. They taught because they loved what they were doing, and they wanted to share it. And that kind of impulse stayed with me through, and it still continues to do so through my later teaching. And so I had the honor of studying with some some great artists. One of whom was a man named Jan Cox, who
Ian
Jan.
Jan.
Jan. We'd go. It could be that. You could say it that way, but he was from Holland, but he lived mostly in Belgium, and he had actually been in the underground in the Second World War, and but also was a really gifted artist and was very influential, as he was to many of the students at that school, and others. Feininger, whose father was at the Bauhaus, and he went there to that place, so it was really a strong faculty. But the faculty, again, they were really concerned about doing art as well as teaching it, and so they had a real, connection to what the young people coming to study.
The students caught that passion.
Yeah, I caught. Well, yes, they were on fire with that process, and it's something I often say to my own students who have an interest. That you really have to want to be in this. You have to love this, and if you don't have that love, then it may not stay with you. And it's a difficult career. You have to really give up a lot of regular, things like nice homes in the country and all that to stay with your art.
Yeah,
and
I know the problems.
So it's it's that kind of a thing. So I continued on. My wife and I, she's been a great help to me over the years, and most recently, in 2013, I got accepted to a gallery in New York, and she came down with a serious illness, but she didn't tell me because she felt that if she did do so before the show would open, I would not go. So she was very
helpful.
She's a very strong person.
I should mention your wife Joanna is in our audience.
Yes.
We rarely have an audience, but we're very happy to have her in the audience.
She's a terrific person. Love her dearly.
Let me ask you, was there someone in your early life, very early life, who put that sensitivity to art into your head so that it could emerge later?
My father was actually an inventor. He invented the very beginnings of what is now known as the emergency light system. Those little boxes that sit in restaurants and other places that go on during power outages.
Yeah.
He literally invented it. And he went to Northeastern later. He had dropped out of high school in his 10th grade, but then continued on and went to Northeastern and then up to Wentworth, and he studied some math and engineering there. So he's got about 6 or 7. He passed away some years ago, but he's got a number of patents. They're probably still going in the patent office. But he had that kind of a sensibility. He liked to explore and understand things. And
so you think that's where that was the source?
I think
that could be a source both for the art and for the industrial.
Yeah, that's true.
And
my mother was also if she had had the opportunity, she would have probably become a poet, but she didn't. But that was another thing. And I understand that somewhere in the Chisholm legacy, there's an artist out in Scotland somewhere, buried in one of the burial grounds over there, and but he was an artist in about the 18th century. So I guess it's in the blood.
So you got it from someplace.
Yeah, I think so.
Because it's strong.
Oh, it's just such a. I think as a poet and as a working artist yourself, in that sense, you know how things have to fall into place in a certain way to make things happen.
Yeah.
And that's what seemed to happen. So
tell us something now. Our audience has been curious about the painting that they're seeing on our long shot, our 2-shot. Can you say something about this painting and maybe talk about its style and that sort of nature, which we mentioned in the introduction, that you work with? Yeah,
while I was at museum school, there tends to be an emphasis on abstract, new ways of painting, or at least to that time frame. And so I had done a series called the Studio Cave, and it was based on the idea that artists are often giving work for other places, for buildings, and to sell sometimes, or to give whatever they do. And but sometimes it's important for the artist to celebrate the place where the painting comes about. And so
the actual physical place.
Yeah. So I had studied with Feininger, and he had one of the projects at the museum school, and one thing he had us do was to do what he called a cave painting. And so we tried to understand how the ancient painters whose works are in the caves now we can find nowadays might have been thinking about their work. And so, in a way, the caves are celebrations of the work that they did, inherently, because they didn't move them so there were too many places around. So, and I got out and I started to work more out in nature, and I started to get to a more, a naturalistic place. I decided to start doing paintings on site. And all of the years after I graduated from the museum school, I stayed at the MFA teaching both adult classes in painting and drawing and kids, teen classes. So in 2003, I was teaching in the Impressionist Gallery at the MFA with a teen class. And we were gathered around the Degas sculpture, the little dancer, the bronze piece in that gallery at the MFA. And so a parent came in to see us at work. And so later that year, one of the youngsters was accepted to a very prestigious prep school that dealt with art. And as a consequence of that, the parents gave me a wonderful book. And it was a book on 19th century drawing technique by a man named Charles Bogg. And it was very old school academic drawing. But I looked at it and I said, gee, this is somewhat like I've been doing myself, teaching students to stand away and look carefully at the work and block it out in a certain particular way. And so I said, the thing is that this is a transpositional process. I can take this to other types of media, or other views, I should say. So instead of thinking of it as a studio project for a figure or a portrait, I could use that technique outside. And right. The technique consists of standing off and blocking out your study from about a 6-8 foot distance away, and very careful sighting. And so I tried it.
I want to mention the title of this. Yeah. This is Millbrook 2.
Yes.
The Millbrook is one of the locations you chose to
up in
stand off and,
right.
and examine.
So I started with a relatively small scale. So, for that kind, sometimes people that work with the outside paintings in this particular technique use a small scale, very small, say about 10 by 14 or so. But this is, as you can see, a little bit larger. But I blocked out the painting. And while I was at the museum school, I studied with another person who was he was really big about the still life. And his name was Henry Schwartz. And Henry taught us how to do the trempe-l'oeil painting, which is a very tight, very detailed type of an approach.
Uh-huh.
It takes 6 months to get a painting done. And so using both ideas, I kind of put them together. And I started to paint outside as if I were in a studio. Usually the term is, a plein air painting, which it is. You're out in the air and all that. But
say that again. What's the term?
Plein air.
Plein
air.
Yeah.
So being out there, just really being right in the spot and working in nature. But usually a painter does not go big on site. It's tricky. And usually they're used as study vehicles that maybe somebody will bring back to their studio and bring up a scale and do a large rendition of it. But I decided I was going to finish the paintings out there. And so, and being around the Impressionists and all the great paintings at the Museum of Fine Arts, I started to, by osmosis, gain some ideas. I didn't ever study Impressionism, but I just, it's a technique that allows you to get, the tones down and the colors, to vibrate, I think.
Are the colors in this painting reflective of the actual colors in situ when en plein air, where you painted?
Yes. So that was the nucleus. So I worked on site, and there's a technique that is used in Henry's class. We used to glaze over it with darker colors over a given works on a given day, and then come back and bring up the colors again and keep working like that until we reached a certain finish. And so it's an old-fashioned technique of layered painting, where you put a dark, transparent glaze over a dry underpainting and keep working like that. Well, that painting has a lot of that going in it. I would put a dark tone over this once they're dried to the touch at home, and then come back over to site and work on it until I completed it.
Tell me how you've showed us, and we're seeing
Yeah.
some other paintings
Right.
done with the same ideas and the same general subject material. How do they differ from each other?
Well, I mean, as time moved along in this particular sequence, I started to bring up a larger scale. I was working with a canvas 40 by 30.
40
by 30 inches, then up to 50 by 40 outside.
What size is this?
This is about 28 by 36 by 28, I think. And so that's getting there. It's getting large. But when you get outside with a 50 by 40, it gets really tricky. But some years ago, before the series that I mentioned about tonight, I did a painting in Chelsea, over at the old Admiral's Hill facility that is now a development, looking at the bridge. I didn't bring that over, but that painting, I started at home with a bunch of canvases. I didn't finish it. I mean, it started at home, but I brought it over to the site with a bunch of canvases, and I started to put C-clamps to pull them all together. And it became 8 foot wide. And instead of putting it to form up a usual rectangle, I started to let it just breathe and have shapes, different outside shapes all around it. And so that became the Tobin Bridge. And so it was very different. And it could have probably been more successfully done quicker if I had done this in the studio. But I was out there fighting away with nature with this huge monster painting, trying to get it done. So I have this interest in working outside, particularly in that scale ever since that point.
And of course, you're being very gracious in not mentioning some of the technical problems like wind.
That happened a few times.
Or dust flying onto the canvas, or people screaming. And
people coming by and thinking that I was making a glider to go over the Mystic Bridge, the river or whatever it was. And so...
When was that?
That was about 1988. So it was kind of interesting.
I'll say.
Yeah.
I'll say.
Then I did another painting, 70 by 50 outside. And I had a vehicle that I have to put, I'd put the painting on the roof and go over to a playing field. And that was just more regular because it had regular shape dimensions around the edges. But that was a monster scale. And I
was picturing you buying one of those vans that the glass companies.
No. But the old station wagons could hold, good scale, so that was part of it. But so it wasn't new to me to go up.
So that's the sequence that we've seen, and that this is part of.
Yes.
Tell me. I want to get to education in a minute, but tell me what you're working on right now.
I'm working on a painting. It's not that large. It's 40 by 50 of the Byfield salt marshes.
Oh, another exterior.
Yeah, and I'm developing the drawing in the studio. I had developed it somewhat on site, but it's really, with a large canvas, it's hard to get everything coagulated, up there, because it's cars whipping by them right on the side of the road and all that. So and
worry about somebody coming by who's texting or something and weaving all over the place.
Oh, believe me. So I decided I'd block out the drawing at least and make my design changes as I needed to get the composition to pull together in my home studio. And once I get the setup blocked out, then I'm going to go back up there and work probably next spring. And,
I also wanted to ask, you are a photographer as well.
Yeah, I've done some good things, yeah.
Do you do that occasionally for the fun of it, or do you consider that another art form, another pictorial art form, and do it as seriously as you do an oil?
It's in tandem. I know very dear friends of mine do use photorealist technique, which requires tight, work with a photograph, and I that's fine. It's real. I like a lot of the results that come out of it, but I like the adventure of nature. I like to be out there with. And maybe make the mistakes that nature sometimes will maybe cause.
Yeah.
And but in fact, one of the paintings that I have, these black and whites that when I did last year, I was in that sequence I called "In Nature's Realm." I don't know, it sounds corny about that, but I do like music, and I liked Dvorak, and I said that sort of what I'm doing. I'm in nature's realm, and I'm doing stuff.
Do you play music while you paint?
No, I do this. I don't. I have a guitar. I haven't played in years, but literally listen. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I've gone through Etienne Messiaen, the great French composer of the 20th century. I love his work. And there's a painting, an abstract painting at the North Shore's Lynn campus that's based on his work.
Really?
Yeah. So
I'll have to get down there. I know I haven't seen it.
it's up on the second floor leading up to the graphic design section.
Were you instrumental in getting it there?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good paint, good 8 foot by 5 foot.
That's a good point to segue to education. You mentioned North Shore. You've taught there for many years, or I taught there for many years. Tell me about how you go about. This is a really vague general question. We only have not too much time, but how do you go about getting students enthusiastic about art when they are bombarded by social media, by movies, by television, from all sides, and the industry that's bombarding, or industries that are bombarded are billion-dollar industries using very sophisticated techniques.
Oh.
But we are in a classroom, and you've got to talk 1 on 20 and get them motivated. How do you do that successfully with art?
I just, let them know that if I want to, do a survey, you might say, to ask each of the students what their particular interests are, whether their interests lay, and what are they willing to go to in terms of developing that. And that's the arts, the fine arts, whether it's the writing arts or the theatrical arts or the music art, are really difficult, areas, and you have to be really totally committed to it. But if not, there are other possibilities. When I was at Mass Art, I studied with a woman named Diana Korzenik, and she was a very, very smart, very brilliant person, and she had kind of pointed out there are 4 core bases to the studio arts. One is the person wants to make a living, basically. So that would be the graphic design or the commercial or illustrative art and so forth. The other is psychoanalytical, where a person would go into therapeutic usages for art purposes. The third would be the artist who wants to make, hang out, maybe live in the studio and hang out with all the other artists and all of that.
The romantic Paris kind of climate?
That's right. And nowadays we have the art that comes from all over the world, multicultural. And I think it much more than when I was in school, but certainly was developing then. And the idea that what an artist will have as an idea frame from another part of the world will be probably different than an American artist, in the sense of what their training is and their whole point of emphasis. And I said, that's beautiful. It makes a lot of sense to have that nice kind of connection. And when I was at Mass Art, there was a kid she was actually born in Crete, but she grew up in London. And I'll make this quick. But she did a piece based on celebrating all of the arts of the world. And she made this huge box that people could crawl into and gather inside and hold hands. And so celebrate, the connectedness of all the artists. It was kind of a crazy thing to do, but it was fun.
You must get students who have had art classes before.
They do,
Fairly
yes.
sophisticated and well-trained, and you have students who can't draw a straight line occasionally.
And they'll tell me that, and say, I'm going to bet you whatever you want that you're going to be able to draw by the time you get out of my class, and by the end of the semester. And so they get working, and there's exercises that I teach them that gives them the comfort to be able to put marks down on a piece of paper without going into a worry state, but they keep working, and by the semester's end, they seem to have got something going.
They get a feeling of accomplishment to draw a nice picture of a banana and an apple.
That's right.
And it looks like a banana and an
apple.
Well,
a design class. I had them work with one of the most abstract of abstract artists, Vasily Kandinsky, and they frankly didn't know what the term abstract meant. in the design class. And by the end of the semester, we were all working together on a collaborative piece to make a picture, an interpretation of one of his paintings. And it was really fun, and they enjoyed it, and I certainly did. And this past summer, we had work over to the Rockwell Museum. The students had produced 2 pieces that were based on 2 of the 4 freedoms that he painted, which is being celebrated this year. And they came out great. These kids really worked. They really worked. And we were able to get things. It was some of the traditional techniques like gridding and so forth, but they pulled it together.
And you are still teaching at North Shore.
Yes. I probably will go through this spring, and then I'm going to maybe fully retire so I can really get going with some of my work.
Are you teaching full load?
No, just 2 courses.
2 courses.
Yeah. I retired from full-time in 2017. So it's...
I'm noticing, I'm always surprised with it goes so fast. We're almost out of time. I want to ask you a 20-second question. What's the basic fact of advice you could give somebody who's thinking about being an artist? One basic fact of advice.
I would say find the core of what you want to do. You just really sit down and study other artists or take courses in drawing of whatever it might be, figure drawing.
And go for it.
Yeah, and then go for it.
And not listen to people say, art, make some money.
I know.
Jim Chisholm, I want to thank you very much for coming down and being on the Writer's Block. It's been very interesting. And it's a real treat once in a while to have a non-writer, different world point of view. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I want to thank you in TV land for being with us on the Writer's Block. If you've learned something about art from Jim Chisholm and how to interpret and teach and understand art and have a successful career if you're after that, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Thanks for being with us, and I hope to see you again next week on the Writer's Block. Good night.